Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast. We'll be breaking down UFC 267, Błachowicz versus Teixeira, and we have got a pretty stacked card on our hands. 2 title fights, the return of Chimaev, Makhachev is on the card as well, and basically every other Russian prospect you can think of. And because of that, it's going to be Chalk City up in here, so all my Chalk boys rise up. But just to get in front of it a little bit, I do want to say that I might sound like a bit of a broken record throughout the podcast here. I am going to side with a lot of the favorites on the card. I do think a lot of them are rightfully favored, but I do feel there are certain spots where they might be a little overvalued and that the line is a little wide, but I will still pick them. And really, we're just seeing the full effects of the Russian tax going on in this card. Hopefully we can navigate our way around this and maybe weed out some of the more shaky favorites. But who knows? A lot of these guys look pretty legit, and maybe all of the favorites cash and all of our parlays hit and we look like geniuses and we end up milking the bookies. But regardless, I am still going to break down these cards to the best of my ability. Hopefully give you guys a little more insight or a bit more information on some of these fighters. But like always, I do want to break down the previous card before we get any further. So if you want to jump on ahead, I'll leave timestamps below. And without wasting any more time, let's get right into the recap. So as far as betting goes, I had a pretty solid night, cashed nearly 10 units on the card. Very happy with that. Did get kind of lucky in certain spots, but not going to complain too much. We had some bad bounces before. Really fortunate to have some go our way this time. But let's start with the first fight of the night, Jonathan Martinez versus Zviad Lazishvili. And I wasn't able to do too much tape on this card until like the day before. And by the time I finished doing the tape, it was at near a pick'em. Obviously, the value side would have been Martinez at plus odds. Lazishvili, obviously the stand-up, not particularly great, and him coming in short notice, him being primarily a wrestler, grappler, I think the odds were stacked against him. Somehow he opened as like a massive favorite, so good on anyone who jumped on that. I personally didn't, but good on anyone who was able to cash on Martinez. And then moving along, Souza versus Marcos. Another fight I didn't really have any action on, but I did feel Marcos was the side. I just didn't really have it in me to bet on her. I did say that she could potentially start out strong. Obviously her job on the line here, arguably her career as well, because if she gets cut here, I don't know if any other promotion is going to look to have her on the roster. But yeah, she showed a lot of aggression this fight, and Souza does struggle a bit with pressure and pace. So Marcos, I think, got it done pretty handily there. So good on anyone that actually pulled the trigger on her. I personally was a little afraid since this is Randa Marcos we're talking about here. But moving along, Jeff Molina, Daniel Lacerda, or Daniel Da Silva apparently. Another fight I didn't really have any action on. Just not enough tape on Lacerda or Da Silva to really make me confident in Molina. I know Molina is definitely a little more proven, but Lacerda, we just don't know where he was at going into this fight. He definitely looks like a skilled fighter, but he might just be one of these guys who are round one or bust. I'd like to see a little more from him before just completely going to that conclusion here. He did get caught early in that second, just throwing those naked leg kicks the whole fight. But I'd like to see a little more from him before I completely write him off. But moving along, Common Worthy versus Jay Herbert. So I did have a bit of action on this fight. Initially, I just wanted to play the under, or fight doesn't go the distance. I figured someone was going to get knocked out, but I did get a little greedy with it. Instead of playing the under, I just decided to take Herbert by knockout, and then I also put a little bit on Herbert to win by KO TKO in round 1. So I just like the odds a little bit better on that. I know that Worthy could potentially have caught Herbert, but I figured Herbert, a little younger, is still in his prime. And while Herbert may be a little chinny, I know that Worthy for sure is super chinny. And with how quick and aggressive Herbert starts, I felt that he'd be the one to touch the chin of Worthy before Worthy got to him. So I just like the odds a little better on that. So I ended up just playing Herbert by KO instead of taking the under. A little greedy, and it worked out, so I'm happy with that. But moving along, Jamie Pickett Laureano Staropoli. And, I was going back and forth on this fight throughout fight week on whether or not I'd like to bet it. I did say that Staropoli should not be this big of a favorite, but was hesitant to take Jamie Pickett just because I felt Pickett is just not a good fighter whatsoever. So I was just more so trying to fade Staropoli a little bit. And I did end up just putting a really small, like 0.3 unit shot on Pickett to win via decision. I didn't think Pickett had a ton of power or a lot of submission upside. So I figured this fight would kind of just be a bit back and forth, really grindy, really sloppy. And if that happens, I'd much rather be holding a ticket on like the guy that's plus like 385. And with Pickett, talk about someone whose physique is really all for show. The guy had all the physical tools to win this fight, but did not use them whatsoever. I mean, he had the length and the reach advantage over Staropoli, wasn't able to really get the jab going, didn't really use too many kicks. Had the size advantage as well, but wasn't really able to use the grappling or the wrestling until a bit later in the fight after Staropoli had gassed. So, you could see why I wasn't too thrilled about taking Pickett here, but at the end of the day, I did feel there was some value there, so I ended up taking him. Ultimately, Staropoli just isn't that great of a fighter and should not be fighting at 185. Even against, a really low-level guy like Pickett, he's not going to be able to get it done. But yeah, moving along, Tabitha Ricci, Maria Oliveira. Ricci was the first leg of a parlay. I just did not like what I saw from Oliveira on tape. And, Ricci, my concern with her was being a bit smaller in that she might not be able to hit the takedowns. But, after seeing weigh-ins, she didn't look tremendously smaller than Oliveira. And with Ricci, she was pretty reliable to go to the grappling, go to the wall and stall if necessary. So I thought she was a relatively safe bet, and she did end up delivering. So not much else to say there. Mason Jones, David Onama. So Jones was the second leg of a parlay that I had. Didn't lock that in until a bit later when I was able to do tape on this. And initially I had felt that Onama coming in short notice, up a weight class against someone like Jones, who is a pretty prolific grappler with solid cardio. I just thought that this would be a pretty easy fight for Jones. And Onama having a ton of fights not go the distance, I thought that should it get into the second and third rounds, Jones would have a pretty significant advantage. But it looked like the cardio of Onama checked out, and it looked like he might have had the better striking as well. But yeah, Jones was able to get out a pretty close decision there, and this was actually giving me some flashbacks to when Jones made his short notice debut against Mike Davis as a pretty sizable dog and ended up making the fight much closer than it had to be. So kind of funny how things play out that way, but hopefully they give Onama a layup fight next for his troubles, maybe feed him Alan Patrick or something, and hopefully do the same for Jones as well. He's gotten some pretty tough matchups so far, and honestly, his striking defense has looked pretty problematic. He's got a fantastic, cardio and pace and, good wrestling, but he just takes way too much damage in all of his fights. I'd like to see him, get a few easier fights, really work on his striking a little bit more. So he's not taking too much damage because the kid's still young. He's still got a lot of potential. Would hate to see that chin get cracked before he even, really fully realizes that potential. But, moving forward, Jun Young Park, Gregory Rodriguez ended up taking a shot on Rodriguez. I did think the size and the strength of Rodriguez would be a little too much for Park, but the fight ended up playing out way more closely than I had expected. It honestly looked like Rodriguez might have been done at certain points, but I think the power eventually got to Park. And I mentioned this before, I did feel that Park had gotten pretty favorable matchups in the sense that he wasn't facing some extraordinarily big middleweights before, whereas now he's going up against Rodriguez, who is pretty damn big even for middleweight standards. And there's just so many shots you could take before your body just shuts down. I know he didn't get completely flatlined or anything, but it looked like the fatigue might have gotten to him a little bit on top of the fact that he was just taking some really heavy shots. I think Park might be a little better off moving down to welterweight because at this point at middleweight, I just don't know if he's going to be able to get too far. He's going to be pretty severely undersized going forward. Anyways, let's keep this rolling. Next fight, Nick Negumarianu versus Ike Villanueva. So, all right, this was a pretty bad bet. I had taken a half unit shot on Villanueva. Actually, it was a half unit on Villanueva to win via decision, and it was at around like plus 800. I thought there might have been some value there, but obviously that was just a terrible bet. For some reason, I just thought this would be a somewhat back and forth sort of fight. Both guys exchanging in the pocket a little bit, maybe a little bit of clinching, even though there probably wasn't any indication that would happen. I mean, Villanueva, not exactly the best footwork, not great durability. Don't know why I thought this would go to a decision. So, bad bet. So let's move on from that. Francisco Trinaldo versus Dwight Grant. And, not a great bet here either. It was at like near pick'em for most of the time. And I just felt that in a pretty low-paced fight that, it'd be pretty 50-50, obviously, but I would give maybe Dwight Grant the upside with some of the power shots. Maybe he'd land a knockdown here or there, or just, optically it looked like he'd land the heavier shots. But I just did not give enough respect to the grappling game of Trinaldo. I didn't think he'd be able to go to it too effectively given his cardio and his age, but he proved me wrong there and was able to mix it up pretty well and won a somewhat close decision. I still don't know if Trinaldo at like minus odds would have been the play, but it was still, I think, a pretty close fight. But moving along, Alex Caceres, Sungwoo Choi, so for sure got really lucky with this one. Did have a half unit bet on Caceres, but honestly that probably shouldn't have cashed. Choi should have gotten Caceres out of there in that first round had he not have illegally kneed him. But, good on Caceres for just not looking for a way out. He just took the point deduction and decided to keep on fighting. Honestly, I thought after that point Caceres was still going to lose because it had looked like Choi was just the better striker. And, he had found the mark a number of times. I felt that it would have just been a matter of time before Choi knocked him down and finished him for sure. But, good on Caceres, showing some veteran savvy there, locking up that submission. And in hindsight, from a betting perspective, this was such an interesting fight because looking back, Choi definitely looked like a massive favorite here. He had a pretty significant advantage on the feet and was on the verge of finishing Caceres there. But on the flip side of things, it does look like his defensive grappling is a bit of a liability. So I guess the odds were about right in hindsight. I'm just a little surprised Caceres was able to pull off the submission. But overall, I still feel Choi's a pretty legit prospect. The guy's definitely got hands, but he'll really need to work on his defensive grappling because at 145, if he ever wants to make it into the top 15, he's going to have to be able to keep this fight standing. And as it stands, it doesn't look like his defensive grappling is quite there just yet. But, he is still pretty young, so hopefully he can make those improvements. And then moving along, Jessica Rose Clark versus Jocelyn Edwards. And I did actually have a fair amount of action on Clark here. I initially had I think a unit and a half on her and then ended up placing an extra unit on her. Probably could have gone harder because I did say that even though this fight would have been pretty close on the feet, I felt that if Clark went to the wrestling, she could have looked like a much bigger favorite, and she definitely did there. And a lot of people are giving Clark shit for that lay and pray style, but she just took the easiest path to victory there. If anything, Edwards should be the one getting the criticism for being dominated for 15 rounds, basically not showing any sort of offense, not showing any get-ups, not showing any takedown defense. And this isn't even the first fight that it happened. She got dominated in her last fight as well. Like, how do you expect fighters to not take advantage of such a big hole in their opponent's game, especially since you get to double your paycheck essentially for getting the W? So, yeah, Edwards might just be an auto fade next time she goes up against another grappler, or really anyone with a bit of grappling. And just a funny little coincidence, Edwards and Antonina Shevchenko actually have the same nicknames, La Pantera, which might actually be Spanish for no fucking ground game. Sorry, let's move that along. Grant Dawson, Ricky Glenn, and I did have half a unit on Glenn. Kind of fortunate that it was a draw because that 10-8 round was a little soft. Honestly, just seems a little inconsistent on how they give out these 10-8 rounds. Like, how was this round 3 a 10-8 round and not the Paiva Phillips round 1 a 10-8 round? Yeah, I'm still a little salty about that, but, going back to this fight, I think what really contributed to Dawson gassing so hard in that third round was the fact that he just does not have much stand-up and just is not very comfortable in the stand-up. And so he had to really force his grappling, really go to it aggressively the first 2 rounds. And that led to him just gassing out. And I wasn't the highest on Dawson coming into this fight, but after seeing this performance, I somehow am even lower on him because he kind of confirmed a lot of the suspicions I had about him, and it kind of just showed that he's a really one-dimensional fighter, and he's going to have to really work on his stand-up to even sniff the top 15 at this point. Like, he is a solid wrestler, and I actually don't think his cardio is that bad, but his stand-up is just such a liability that it forces him to really attack the grappling very aggressively. And, Khabib is like the gold standard when it comes to these wrestler-grappler types, but even at the higher levels, Khabib did have to let the fight breathe a little bit on the feet, and even he wasn't just dominating guys for 25 straight minutes with the grappling. He would take minutes off on the feet, kind of rest up a little bit before going back to the wrestling. And, Dawson, if he wants to get into the top 15, I do think that he's going to have to mix in the striking a little bit better so he can pace himself a little better so he doesn't just completely gas himself out by the time that 3rd round comes around. But, that's enough about that fight. Let's move it right along to the main event. Marvin Vettori, Paulo Costa. I did have quite a bit on Vettori here. And then I also did take Vettori to win in round 4, round 5. And also took the under as well. I just, for some reason, didn't see this going to the decision here. I thought that with Costa's cardio, that Vettori would take over in the later rounds, potentially find either a TKO or like a submission victory if he was able to get his grappling going. But the whole issue coming into this week was the weight cut of Costa, him coming in super heavy and stuff. So I think that had this fight actually taken place at 185, had Costa actually cut down to the agreed upon weight class, he probably would have died, but had he actually been able to make it there, I think his cardio would have been much more compromised than it was now. The guy basically didn't have to cut much, and he showed up way, way, way bigger than Vettori. Like, I don't think Vettori was able to realistically get much grappling going, given the fact that he was, giving up probably like 15, 20 pounds of pretty solid muscle there. But, it ended up working out. The cardio of Vettori checked out, the volume striking of Vettori checked out, and he ended up winning, I think, 3 of those 5 rounds. So yeah, those round props and the unders all didn't cash, but was happy to come away with the moneyline victory here, all things considered. But yeah, that'll do it for the recap. I know I did go a little long here, but hopefully, we get a few more insights going forward in regards to some of these fighters. But, without further ado, let's get right into UFC 267. So kicking off the card, we have Tagir Ulanbekov versus Allan Nascimento, and Ulanbekov's the minus 300 favorite. Comeback on Nascimento is plus 250. And let's start with the prospect in Ulanbekov. I think the guy's an extremely well-rounded prospect. He's kind of tall for the division. He's kind of tall, lanky. He mixes up his striking pretty well. He's got a good kicking game also, and, he is a part of Khabib's crew, so, the guy's definitely got some wrestling also. He's got good ground and pound, good submissions. I think a very solid prospect. And, coming into the UFC, he was a pretty massive favorite. And, that was a fight that actually played out much closer than expected. And for that reason, I think that's why he's only opening, well, not only because minus 300 is still pretty crazy, but for that reason, he's opening at minus 300 as opposed to like minus 600 like he was before. But, this is, I think, a very winnable fight for him. I think this is honestly a step down in competition for Ulanbekov. And as weird as it may sound, this might be a decent buy low spot for him, even though he's at minus 300. But yeah, let me talk about his opponent real quick. Nascimento. The guy is pretty well-rounded. Also, he has decent striking, does get a little wild on the feet, but, he is a little hittable. Does look like he has some grappling, but, I honestly haven't seen him have too much success there, at least from what I've seen. It does look like he's got some submissions at the regional scene, but, some of these Brazilian fighters, super padded record. I know the guy's 18-5, but yeah, some of the guys he's beaten are just absolute cans in there. That said, though, I do think that Nascimento's got a decent skill set. However, I just think that Ulanbekov is all around the better fighter. Like, I think his striking is just a bit better. It's a little tighter. It's a bit crisper in there. He's a bit more technical, and he does mix his attacks up pretty well. And then as far as like the wrestling goes, I do believe he's the better wrestler as well. Nascimento might be the better grappler, submission grappler, but that I'm not even 100% sure of. Nascimento, he does have a number of submissions on his record, but they're against pretty low level guys. And it does look like every time he takes a step up in competition, he does kind of struggle a bit. And I do think that Ulanbekov is a level above Nascimento. So, yeah, skill-wise, I do think Ulanbekov is a bit better. And then as far as level of competition, I do have to favor Ulanbekov a bit more as well. I think he's fought just tougher competition on the Russian regional scene. And, he did struggle a little bit in his last fight, but I do think that was a good spot to really see him get tested. He was in a very tough fight, and he showed a lot of heart, a lot of toughness in that fight. And, he was able to fight through it. So I think that was a very good look on his end. And Bruno Silva, I believe, is a better fighter than Nascimento, so I do think that Ulanbekov should get the victory here. Because outside of just like a freak submission or something, I do think that Ulanbekov should get the decision victory. So I'm going to go with Ulanbekov. I think he wins via decision. I think he wins pretty dominantly, and I am looking to put Ulanbekov in some parlays. And moving right along, we have Magomed Mustafaev versus Damir Ismagulov, and Ismagulov's the minus 260 favorite. Come back on. Mustafaev is plus 220, and I think it's pretty apparent now that the UFC is not going to be giving Ismagulov any sort of push. I think they're just going to keep feeding him these unranked killers, quote-unquote killers. Mustafaev, not exactly a killer in my opinion, but a very, very tough opponent with, very little upside for Ismagulov here. But, just taking a look at these fighters real quick. So, I guess we'll start with Mustafaev since we're already talking about him. The guy is, super well-rounded. He's got good grappling. He's got good striking. I think he's got better grappling, but, his striking is pretty solid as well. Does seem to have quite a bit of power. And, the guy's physique, he's actually quite muscle-bound. You might not be able to tell because of how pale he is, but, the guy's actually pretty jacked in there. But yeah, I do feel that Mustafaev is kind of dangerous on the feet, not because he's some crazy good technical striker or he's some crazy power punter or anything, but he will throw some pretty crazy spinning attacks, pretty low percentage moves that have been able to connect. So not sure if he can keep that up, but if he lands those, he can definitely hurt Ismagulov here. But he is a well-rounded fighter, so if it's not working out on the feet, he can get his grappling going, and he is someone that has shown he could definitely attack a grappling heavy game plan. He showed that against Riddell. Prior to the Riddell fight, I thought that Mustafaev might not have the best cardio, but he was able to consistently go for takedowns against Riddell and was having a bit of success. So that definitely changed my opinion of him a little bit. Granted, Riddell not exactly the best when it comes to takedown defense, but Mustafaev did show good aggression there and I guess decent cardio. But yeah, I do feel this is definitely a step up in competition for Ismagulov here. I think that Mustafaev is probably the best wrestler that Ismagulov has faced. Probably the most well-rounded fighter, and it's unfortunate because there's no ranking next to his name. This isn't really going to progress the career of Ismagulov too much. But, it is what it is. The guy's not the most exciting fighter, and I can see why the UFC is not really giving him a push. But taking a look at Ismagulov, the guy's just a tactician on the feet. Super technical, really good technical striking. He likes to pressure opponents. He's got, a good jab. Fights behind the jab really well, actually. He's got good feints. And, he will work the body, just very high-level stuff. He's got good footwork. And, just super high level on the feet, but, plays it super safe. He's not going to overextend and, just wing bombs in there or anything, but, he'll just look to stand and just pick opponents apart. And on top of that, he's got good wrestling, good grappling as well. But again, not super dangerous there. He'll look to just take opponents down, sit in their guard and just lay on top of them, lay a bit of ground and pound on them. Just, again, super conservative, super safe in there. Not the most exciting fighter, but, he gets it done. He knows what it takes to win on the cards. So, good in the sense that he'll win you fights, but might not be the most exciting fighter in that regards. And he's more or less kind of coasted through his fights, through the UFC at least. But, he is coming off of a pretty dicey win over Alves in his most recent fight. That was a fight that Ismagulov, he was actually coming off of a decently long layoff. He was a massive favorite in that fight. I had actually had him parlayed and was kind of shitting myself early in that fight and late in that fight. Ismagulov, he did pull off the victory, but early in that round early in the fight, he did get dropped and, was able to recover, which was a good look. And, I was actually kind of impressed by that to see him be able to recover from that. Kind of shows that he can kind of face a bit of adversity and fight through it. So that was good to see because up until then, I don't think he's really struggled or really looked bad. And, seeing a little bit of weakness and seeing him fight through it is, I think, a good sign. And then also in that third round, which, he dropped across the board, got a little dicey as well. He was starting to slow down a bit, whereas Alves was starting to pick up, and Alves was starting to land some pretty heavy shots in that third round as well. But Ismagulov was able to get a victory there. So, kind of happy that happened. But, it did show a few holes in his game a little bit. So, I'm not sure if that's something to be too concerned about in this fight. Mustafaev, while he is a more well-rounded fighter than Alves, I do feel that Alves was probably the more explosive striker. But, Mustafaev presents a completely different set of problems for Ismagulov here in the wrestling. And the interesting thing here is, even though Ismagulov has 100% takedown defense, he hasn't really fought a legit wrestler like Mustafaev in the UFC yet. And, while Alvarez and Moises are high-level grapplers, they're not really high-level wrestlers. So, they're good submission guys, but they're not great at taking the fight to the ground. So that 100% takedown defense, while it looks good on paper here, doesn't tell the full story. And I do believe Mustafaev is a much better wrestler than these guys. So I do feel the takedown defense of Ismagulov is really going to be tested here. We're going to see how well he's going to do against someone like Mustafaev, who can be really aggressive and relentless with the wrestling attack. So, I'm very interested to see how this fight plays out. As far as a pick goes, though, I am going to pick Ismagulov. I'm actually not as confident as I'd like to be in this spot. I think Ismagulov should be able to keep the fight standing, but, I think Mustafaev can make this a very gritty, grindy sort of fight. And, we just haven't really seen Ismagulov tested as far as, being in a high-paced grappling sort of fight. The last time Ismagulov went to the grappling for quite a bit was his most recent fight against Alves, where he did have a significant amount of control time, but that was also a fight where he had started to slow down a bit. And, that is definitely a bit concerning. We haven't really seen that from Ismagulov, but we do see that, he does slow down a bit if there's a bit of grappling involved. That said, though, Ismagulov was coming off of a pretty long layoff, might have still been, getting his feet under him a little bit, was not getting as many hard sparring sessions in during that time. So, now that he's picked up his activity a little bit, maybe it won't be as big of an issue, but I don't think that can be ignored. Just because we haven't seen Ismagulov struggle too much, just because we haven't seen him, or just because we haven't seen too many holes in his game doesn't mean that there aren't. But ultimately, I'm still going to side with Ismagulov here. I'm still going to back him. I'm not going to fade him just because I feel this could potentially be a bad matchup for him. Just from what I've seen, I do still think that Ismagulov is the better striker. And, if he is able to keep this standing, or if he's able to even mix in some of his own offensive grappling, he could have a bit of success here. So I'm going to keep backing my boy Ismagulov here, but I don't know if I'll be betting him. This is a decent step up in competition for him. So I'm interested to see how his takedown defense will hold up against a solid grappler in Mustafaev. But I will pick Ismagulov here. I think he wins a pretty competitive decision. And in the next fight, we have Yaozong versus Andrei Petroski. And Petroski's the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on Yaozong is plus 190. So let's start with the underdog in Yaozong first. So far he's had a pretty rough run of it in the UFC. Started off at heavyweight, went up against Cyril Asker and pretty much got dominated there. And then, comes in at light heavyweight against Coulter. And, he looks a bit better, but is still getting pieced up by Coulter in there, which, not a particularly great look. The guy's striking does look a bit wild. His cardio is a little questionable, and I have seen him just resort to wall install in some of his fights. And yeah, I mean, just not too much footage on this guy, honestly. Just outside of those 2 fights, wasn't able to really find anything else. The guy's got tremendously short arms. He's 6'3", but only 72-inch reach, so the guy's really just all torso. However, outside of that, the guy looks like he does have serviceable striking, and, he does seem to be kind of tough and gritty in there. And he'll be going up against Petroski, who is primarily a wrestler. On the feet, he doesn't have too much striking, but, he will look to just kind of blitz in, close the distance, and then look to just get in on the hips of his opponents. He's got very explosive takedowns. He likes to just pick and slam opponents down. And then on the ground, he can get pretty aggressive with the ground and pound, with the submissions as well. However, the issue with him is I feel like he's a one-round fighter. Historically, he's just gotten a ton of one-round finishes, and then when the fight does get extended, if he isn't able to get his opponents out of there, he will gas pretty hard and leave plenty of openings for opponents to finish him there. In fact, all 2 of his losses have been finishes in the second round. So yeah, while I feel the guy's got a decent skill set and does appear to be a decent athlete, I just don't think the cardio is quite there. And if he doesn't get that first round finish, it does get pretty dicey for him. But I think this is a pretty intriguing fight in that regards. I think that Petroski definitely is the better wrestler, the better grappler. And we did see Yaozong struggle a bit with the grappling, but we do have to remember that was at heavyweight. The guy had a ton of size on Yaozong. And, Yaozong is going to be, I think, fighting at his more natural weight class here at 185. He's actually going to, be sizing up pretty well against Petroski here, as opposed to Asker at, heavyweight. However, I'm not going to completely rule out the fact that Petroski could just take Yaozong down, maybe pound him out in that first round, or even find the submission. But I don't know how likely that is. I am actually leaning on, Yaozong maybe, surviving that first round and starting to be able to put it on Petroski come that second and third round. And in Petroski's most recent fight against Gilmore, I actually took a small shot on Gilmore to either win in round 2 or round 3, thinking that, with how hard Petroski gasses, Gilmore would have openings to get the finish. But, I just completely overestimated Gilmore there. Gilmore's just not a good fighter whatsoever. He just is not a good enough fighter to really capitalize on Petroski gassing, right? Like, Petroski was dead tired going into that second round, but all Gilmore really did was just kind of kick out his legs a little bit and look to counter Petroski as he was coming in. He wasn't putting any pressure on Gilmore, or he wasn't putting any pressure on Petroski, and Petroski was pretty much able to just take that second round off, get a second win, and then just take Gilmore down that third round and pound him out. So I'm not sold on Petroski's cardio whatsoever after that performance. I know after that fight, Petroski was talking about how, it's something he's been working on, and, he felt that, after that win, he proved that, he can get past that first round. But I think it's more so just Gilmore just being a completely garbage tier fighter and not being able to capitalize on that. So I think this is something that Yaozong might be able to take advantage of. But again, we haven't seen enough footage from Yaozong to really, confirm that. But just based off of the limited footage that I found on Yaozong, I do feel that he is still better, or he still is a better fighter than Gilmore. And I do think that come that second and third round, he should be able to provide a lot more resistance. So, I'm actually going to go with Yaozong here to pull off the upset. I know the guy's 3-2, but, both of those losses were from, a few years ago, up a few weight classes against, I'd say, more experienced fighters than Gilmore. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Yaozong here to pull off the upset. I might actually put half a unit on him, the money line, and then maybe put a little bit on round 2, round 3, just because I really feel that Petroski's cardio concerns have not really been addressed, and they are something that can be exploited. Maybe Yaozong might not be the guy, but I am willing to take the shot here, and I probably will continue to take the shot on these underdogs against Petroski. Maybe not the best strategy, but I think eventually it will hit, and for this particular fight, I think I am going to go with Yaozong here, and I'll take Yaozong by round 2 TKO. And in the next fight, we have Makwan Amirkhani versus Lerone Murphy, and Murphy's the minus 305 favorite. Comeback on Amirkhani is plus 255. And let's take a look at Amirkhani first. Arguably just one of the biggest flakes in the division. The guy is primarily a grappler, a submission guy, but his wrestling actually isn't all that great. And the guy's cardio is just absolutely garbage. So, even if he is able to take his opponents down, he's not really able to sustain that pace for more than about a round or a round and a half. So, yeah, I think he's largely like round one, submission or bust, or, maybe round 1.5 submission or bust. Anyways, striking is terrible. I think he's got really low output. He's extremely hittable on the feet as well. Overall, I just think that the guy is pretty much, submission or bust, honestly. And he got exposed pretty hard against Kirk in his most recent fight. Kirk, a guy who was making his UFC debut on short notice. Kirk arguably might not even be UFC caliber. So, that was just a very, very bad look. But that was a fight where, Amirkhani looked okay in that first round, but, wasn't able to get the submission. The fight ended up being really just back and forth. And I think Kirk ended up just doing a bit more damage on the feet and was able to steal a decision that fight. So yeah, not a good look on Amirkhani's end. And historically, he just has not done all that well in fights that go to a decision. And in this fight, he will be getting another late notice replacement in Lerone Murphy. Unfortunately for him, though, Murphy is a pretty legit striker. He's got very heavy hands, good power. He's good defensively as well on the feet. His counterpunching is on point. Overall, I just think that Murphy is just a very skilled striker, very legit on the feet. However, I did notice a pretty sizable flaw in his game, and that's the takedown defense of Murphy. Guys have been more or less able to just take him down at will, and while his takedown defense is porous, it is kind of hard to keep him down. He's shown, I guess, decent submission defense, but there's not a ton of footage there. And I think there was only like one sub attempt from a guy who was primarily a striker. So I wouldn't take too much from that, but it does look like it's kind of hard to keep this guy down. However, with that said, I don't think Lerone's really fought a legit submission guy. And I do feel that Amirkhani might be the biggest submission threat that he's fought. And, Lerone's fought some decent wrestlers like Tukhugov and stuff, but I think Amirkhani's probably the more dangerous submission guy. So that, I feel, is going to be a bit of a concern in this fight. On top of the fact that Lerone is coming in a short notice for this fight. It's not his first time doing so he does have a little bit of experience here. I expect his conditioning to be okay. But I guess the real concern really is just that he won't be having a nice full camp to drill that takedown defense, work on his submission defense at all. So a little concerning coming into this fight. Even though I'm not very high on Amirkhani, I do have to give his jiu-jitsu a bit of respect here. I do think he is dangerous on the ground. And if he is able to take Murphy down, which, everyone has been able to take Murphy down, he might be able to lock up a choke. The guy has a very sneaky, a very dangerous anaconda choke. And so that first round and a half for Murphy is probably going to be the most dangerous. That's when they're both going to be dry, both going to be fresh, and when Amirkhani will have the most cardio. But ultimately, I think I am going to side with Murphy here. I really don't think he should be this big of a favorite, though. I think that Murphy should be able to maybe defend a few takedowns, or at least stay safe enough through that first round and a half to really start to be able to put it on Amirkhani as Amirkhani starts to slow down. I do favor the striking of Murphy quite a bit more. And, Murphy might even be able to catch Amirkhani coming in. Murphy's got pretty good power, pretty good accuracy. So he is dangerous on the feet, but, I just don't think the minus 300 something is warranted on Murphy, even though I don't think Amirkhani's that good. Mainly because I feel that the takedown defense definitely very porous for Murphy, and we just have not seen enough from his defensive grappling, his submission defense, to really be confident that he could get out of the submission from Amirkhani. So the pick here for me is Murphy, but I just really don't think that he should be this big of a favorite. So the play for me might just be a small shot on Amirkhani to win via submission, but outside of that, I don't know if I'm going to be touching this fight from a betting perspective. But moving right along, we have Mikhail Oleksiejczuk versus Shamil Gamzatov, and Gamzatov's the minus 155 favorite. Comeback on Oleksiejczuk is plus 135. Let's start with the underdog in Oleksiejczuk first. So, the guy's primarily a striker. He's got pretty good movement on the feet. Does throw a little wild in there, but I really like how he digs to the body. He's a pretty aggressive striker in there, and does seem to have quite a bit of pop in his shots, even though he is going to be a bit undersized. And I do feel that is going to be the biggest weakness that he has in these fights. However, I do feel that the trade-off for this is he's usually the quicker fighter in there. I think his cardio usually is a little better, and he is able to maintain a pretty decent volume, throwing pretty heavy strikes in there as well. So on the feet, I do feel he's got some advantages in those regards, but I do feel his size can be taken advantage of by grapplers. And, we did see him get, I guess, not dominated, but we did see, guys like OSP and Jimmy Crute attack the grappling and actually have success there. However, when it comes to the striking, I do think that the speed and some of the power that Oleksiejczuk brings is going to give some strikers some troubles. But taking a look at his opponent, Gamzatov, the guy, I think, looks like he primarily might be a striker. He's kind of plotty on the feet and, is a bit low volume. Lots of singular strikes. Honestly, nothing much to write home about, but he does look like he has some power. However, I do feel he is a little slow in there, at least from what I've seen. I could be wrong, but it does look like he is a little slower than average. I watched a few of his other fights on the regional scene as well, and I didn't really see too much grappling there, but if anyone has found footage of him grappling, just let me know. But from what I've seen, I don't think the guy has much grappling. I've seen him work in the clinch a little bit, but I haven't really seen him shoot a takedown or really look for a top control time or even look for submissions or anything. So if this is primarily a stand-up fight, or what I think is going to be a stand-up fight, I do have to favor Oleksiejczuk here. I really like the aggression and the pace that he brings to these fights. But again, he will be a bit undersized. That said, though, he hasn't struggled too much with it. The only time the size has really been an issue for him is when opponents have been able to mix in the grappling. And, Oleksiejczuk is coming off of a split decision win over Błachowicz, a fight that he arguably could have lost. But that was a pretty close fight, and I do feel that Błachowicz is a better striker than Gamzatov. And, from what I've seen with Gamzatov, I just have not been super impressed. And with his style, if he is going to bring a stand-up fight, I do think that Gamzatov is just going to give Oleksiejczuk the fight that he wants, and that's going to be a striking match. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go with Oleksiejczuk here. I think the speed is going to be a big factor here for him. I think the footwork is going to be definitely in favor of Oleksiejczuk. Oleksiejczuk, not exactly the best wins in the UFC, but, he has shown that he can beat some of these big plotting light heavyweights, kind of like Roundtree, Tukhugov, Jean Vellante. Again, very low level guys, but he has shown he could beat them to the punch on the feet. And then to a certain extent, Błachowicz, but again, I do feel Błachowicz is a better striker than Gamzatov, and Błachowicz is actually a much bigger light heavyweight than Gamzatov. So while Gamzatov might actually be bigger than Oleksiejczuk, he won't have as crazy of a size advantage over Oleksiejczuk like someone like Błachowicz does. So yeah, not a super in-depth breakdown. I think it really just boils down to the activity, the speed, and the volume of Oleksiejczuk. So yeah, I'm going to side with him here, and I might actually take a small shot on him at plus odds. I do think there is maybe a little value. I do feel that this fight should probably be at either like a pick'em or, Oleksiejczuk as a slight favorite. So I'm going to side with Oleksiejczuk, and I'll have him winning by decision. And moving right along, we have Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And, very interesting matchmaking here. I don't know if I'm really a fan of this because Saint-Denis definitely looks like he could be a decent prospect, but, they're matching him up against a very legit vet in Zaleski here. So not sure what their intention is here, but let's take a look at both guys first. So let's start with the vet Zaleski here. He's, I think, pretty well-rounded. He's got good striking, very good movement in there. Honestly, he's a pretty dynamic striker. He's got a great kicking game. Will throw some spinning attacks. And I do actually feel Zaleski is pretty dangerous on the feet. But, you do have to consider the guy is coming off of a 1.5-year layoff. And, with his style, I think he is a bit reliant on his speed and athleticism. So, the age and the layoff might be a bit of a factor here. However, he'll be going up against Saint-Denis, who is primarily a grappler. And, Saint-Denis, his striking honestly does not look great. He's super hittable there. On the feet, he's got a few winging overhands, a few wild shots, but he is super hittable, and generally he is looking to get the fight to the ground. But he does look like he has solid wrestling. He is very aggressive on top. Seems to have just an iron grip in there. He's got good jiu-jitsu, and he will throw a bit of volume on top. Throw a bit of ground and pound to soften opponents up before finding that submission, but it does look like he is a bit more of a submission artist than he is like a wrestler, ground and pound sort of fighter. So yeah, Saint-Denis definitely a very proficient grappler, but getting the fight to the ground might be a bit of an issue for him here. His footwork isn't particularly great. I've seen him literally just chase opponents across the cage. But yeah, on the feet, I think he's definitely going to be at a pretty big disadvantage here. And, just seeing him, fight some of these other regional fighters, he was getting touched up pretty badly. And on top of that, the guy is, I think, still pretty green. He did start fighting professionally in 2019, so he's only done it for about 2 years now. But like I said, I do think he's a solid prospect. I just think he's got to work on his striking and striking defense quite a bit. And which is why I'm, again, not a real big fan of this matchup here. He's going up against Zaleski, who, his takedown defense isn't particularly great, but, Zaleski is also a black belt himself, so I don't think the submission is going to come very easy for Saint-Denis, but I think where Saint-Denis will really struggle in this fight is in the stand-up. Zaleski, I think, is by far the much more dangerous striker, and with how hittable Saint-Denis is, I can definitely see Zaleski landing some crazy, spinning attack, or even just being able to touch Saint-Denis up, just because I do feel there's a pretty big gap on the feet. However, I do think that if Saint-Denis is able to somehow close the distance, somehow able to get his hands on Zaleski, he could maybe find the submission. I know I said that Zaleski is a black belt, but Saint-Denis does look very legit there, and he does seem very strong, so maybe he's able to just muscle his way into a submission, or maybe just get a bit of control time if he isn't able to get the submission. But yeah, as it stands, I do feel the odds are about right. I do have to favor the experience of Zaleski. I have to favor the striking of Zaleski quite a bit more, considering the fight does start standing. So for that reason, I definitely do have to favor Zaleski. I wouldn't mind a shot on Saint-Denis by submission, but I just have a hard time seeing Saint-Denis being able to pull it off. The guy is still extremely green in there, so I am going to have to go with Zaleski here. I think Zaleski either wins a somewhat dominant decision, or Zaleski might even get the knockout here. However, I think that Saint-Denis by submission might be a little live. However, I just think the other outcomes are a bit more likely here. So as far as an official pick, I think I'll just go with Zaleski by round 2 knockout. But moving right along, we have Albert Duraev versus Roman Kopylov, and Duraev's the minus 265 favorite. Comeback on Kopylov is plus 225. We'll take a look at Duraev first. So, the guy, from what I've seen, looks to be a pretty solid fighter, pretty well-rounded. Striking is serviceable, very meat and potatoes, nothing crazy on the feet, but, it does get the job done. However, I do feel he's a pretty legit grappler. He's got a good double leg. On top, he's pretty heavy there. We'll look to advanced positions, and generally does stay pretty active on top as well. However, I have actually seen him lose position a few times and get reversed, because he gets a little overzealous there. But all in all, I do feel he's got a pretty solid, well-rounded game, a really good grappling game as well. His cardio definitely checks out as well. I think he's gone 5 rounds also, so for sure I think the cardio's there. And overall, I just feel he's a pretty solid fighter. I guess the only red flag I kind of see with him is the long layoff potentially. He is actually coming off of a win on the Dana White's Contender Series, but that was a pretty quick finish, so he didn't get too much cage time there. But it is good to see that he is back in action, and he looked pretty good there. So still a good sign, not too much to complain about there. But taking a look at his opponent, Kopylov, if I'm being honest, I'm not super high on Kopylov. I don't think he's particularly great. He is a striker. He does stay light on his feet. Does seem to have pretty quick hands. I guess a nice stiff jab, but can be a bit low volume though on the feet, and doesn't seem to have too much grappling. The reason I say that's just because the guy got subbed by Carl Roberson, who, the guy's not a grappler whatsoever. Roberson is a kickboxer, and that was actually a fight that Kopylov was losing pretty soundly on the feet, and actually lands the most egregious eye poke on Roberson, and Roberson's eyes bleeding and everything. So, when the fighting resumes, Roberson just looks to clinch up, tie up with Kopylov, basically to, I guess, stall the fight out, but is actually able to get the takedown on Kopylov and actually sink in the rear naked choke. So, a pretty bad look on Kopilov's part, being taken down and submitted by Roberson late in the fight. So, yeah, I feel there's just a pretty clear path to victory here for Duraev here. I think that with the grappling, he could definitely have a lot of success there, can hold Kopylov down, maybe get the submission. Kopylov just does not seem that good on the ground. I've seen Kopylov, controlled on the ground as well, even on the regionals. So I think there's a very, very clear path to victory for Duraev here. And on the feet, maybe I might favor Kopylov a little more. He does seem a little quicker, does seem like the fighter that has a little more in his arsenal on the feet. But I do think Duraev can keep it competitive on the feet long enough for him to secure that takedown and either ride out the round on top or just potentially get the submission. So the pick here for me is Duraev. I think he's a solid parlay piece. Actually, I think this is honestly one of the safer bets on the card. Outside of maybe Kopylov catching Duraev with something, I just don't see Kopylov having too much success in this fight. So give me Duraev, and give me Duraev by round 2 submission. And moving right along, we have Zubaira Tukhugov versus Ricardo Ramos, and Tukhugov's the -160 favorite. Comeback on Ramos is +140. So this is a pretty interesting fight. We have essentially a grappler versus a grappler. However, I do feel that Tukhugov is a little more well-rounded. I think his striking is decent. He's not the most well-rounded or the most technical striker, but I do feel it is serviceable there. And I do think that he's probably going to be the guy with a little bit more power. However, I do feel that Tukhugov does have better wrestling, and I do think he's a bit more reliable to go there. And obviously, he is a part of Khabib's crew, so the wrestling is on point. That said, though, he did not look particularly great against Dawodu in his most recent fight, and he didn't miss weight in that fight also. However, that fight was actually pretty close, and outside of that, his wrestling has generally looked pretty solid. But taking a look at his opponent, Ramos, honestly, I'm not very impressed with Ramos so far. He is a grappler, but he does have some pretty flashy striking in there. He does like to throw quite a few spinning attacks. I actually think he goes to those a little too much. I don't think they're super effective. He was doing this weird little toe tap against Murphy. I don't think it had any effect on the fight whatsoever. I mean, it looked kind of interesting the first time he did it, but the second, third, and fourth time he did it, it just looked kind of stupid. It didn't look like it was really doing any sort of damage. And yeah, it kind of looked ridiculous doing that. Anyways, he is someone who will look to attack the grappling, and he is pretty consistent with it from what I've seen. But from the looks of things, his takedown defense isn't particularly great, and he does look like someone who will play off his back. So, as far as this matchup goes, I think I'm going to side with Zubairov here. I just think that there is a pretty clear path to victory here for Tukhugov. I think he's the better wrestler. Ramos, he might be the better grappler, or at least the better submission grappler, but generally in these matchups, I think that the better wrestler should be able to edge it out, be able to control the submission grappler here. And with how comfortable Ramos is off his back sometimes, he might spend a little too much time there. And, as far as the striking goes, I think that it should be pretty competitive. I don't think either guy is going to have a significant advantage there. If anything, I might slightly give the edge to Ramos. I think Ramos might be a little quicker, a little crisper with the striking. And of course, he's going to be the younger guy. So he might be able to edge it out there. But I think what will really be the difference maker here is the wrestling. And I think that Tukhugov will get enough control time to win it on the cards here. So yeah, the pick here is Tukhugov. I just think that overall he should be able to really control where the fight goes. And, I do have to say that as far as like level of competition, I definitely have to hand it to Tukhugov. Like if you look at some of the guys he's been in there with, he's given a much better of a account of himself as opposed to Ramos, who's really only beaten, some very low level guys. Like, for example here, Tukhugov, he went to a split decision with Moicano, went to a draw with Murphy. And for what it's worth, I do believe that Moicano is a much better version of Ramos. Like, as far as the striking, as far as the jiu-jitsu and everything goes, I think he's just a much better version of Ramos. And I know that was about like 5 years ago, so, quite some time ago. And it definitely looks like Tukhugov might be on a bit of a decline. But I do still think his athleticism is still there to the point that he could, I think, win at least 2 rounds with his wrestling. So I'm going to go with Tukhugov, and I do think that he should be able to win a decision here. And moving along, we have Amanda Ribas versus Virna Jandiroba. And Ribas is the minus 140 favorite. Comeback on Jandiroba is plus 120. So we'll take a look at Ribas first. So, she is primarily a grappler, but, I do feel her striking is coming along pretty well. She's got good offensive striking. Defensively, though, I do feel she's got a bit of work on to do there. She's pretty hittable. Doesn't really move her head much. And, she did get knocked out in her most recent fight. So, that said, though, I do still feel that, Ribas's offensive striking is pretty good. And Rodriguez has shown that she's definitely a top 3 striker in the division. So I don't want to write Ribas off just yet, but I do still feel her defensive striking needs a little bit of work. That said, though, Ribas does excel in the grappling. She's actually got pretty good wrestling, and on the ground, she's got fantastic jiu-jitsu. She's heavy on top. She's got great transitions. She's pretty aggressive there, and then, of course, she can be pretty aggressive with the grappling as well. And this sounds kind of crazy, but I think she's actually dominated all of her opponents in the grappling so far. And, she's actually went to the ground with Dern as well. Probably, dominating might be a little strong there. But outside of Dern, she's more or less had her way on the ground with her opponents. And even against Dern, she was able to get a bit of control time. Did do a bit of damage there as well, whereas Dern was kind of just laying on her back. So even on the ground, on top, Ribas was able to do some work against Dern. So definitely a good look, in my opinion. And, I just like that Ribas wasn't afraid to go to the ground with Dern, even though Dern was or is super accredited there. And a lot of people calling her, jiu-jitsu savant there. So Ribas not showing any fear there, was, I think, a pretty good look from her. Much better than Jandiroba, who looked like she was afraid to go to the ground with Dern, didn't want anything to do there, and was content to just strike with Dern on the feet, even though Dern was kind of landing at will on her as well. So I just like how confident Ribas is with her grappling. Overall, I just feel that Ribas is a pretty legit prospect. She just needs to shore up her striking defense a little bit because I do feel she low-key might be a little chinny, but outside of that, I do feel she's really well-rounded and has got a lot of potential. As far as her opponent goes, though, Jandiroba, she's a pretty high-level grappler as well. He's got good wrestling, good grappling, good jiu-jitsu, but, on the feet, definitely not as well-versed there. Doesn't really seem all that comfortable there, if I'm being honest. She can get backed up pretty easily and really only has just that big looping overhand to stave opponents off and to use to close the distance. Overall, I just feel her striking is a bit stiff, but again, she does her best work on the ground. She's got good wrestling, good takedowns, good top control, and then obviously I think she's got solid jiu-jitsu as well. And on top of that, I do feel that Jandiroba is pretty physically strong, so I do think that helps quite a bit in the women's divisions. I think it definitely helps her secure the takedowns and accumulate the control time as well. But overall, I do feel this is a pretty tough matchup for Jandiroba. I think on the feet, Ribas is the much better striker. I mean, Jandiroba was in a competitive striking match with Dern, and that was a fight she lost to, so she lost the striking battle to Dern, whereas Ribas was winning most of the exchanges between her and Dern. I know it's a little bit of MMA math there, but I think it's pretty apparent or pretty obvious where Jandiroba's striking stands, and I believe it's pretty low level. However, the grappling is where I think the fight gets a bit interesting. This could be a situation where I think both having high-level jiu-jitsu, it could kind of cancel each other out a little bit. We'll just get some pretty, back-and-forth grappling exchanges. However, I feel that whoever is able to initiate those grappling exchanges, whoever is able to get a bit of that top control time is going to be the one that comes out ahead. And leaning Ribas here, mainly because I feel that both of them are pretty good wrestlers. I feel that both have pretty good takedown defense, but I just think that all things considered, I think that Ribas will be the one who will have more opportunities to dictate where the fight is going. And what I mean by that is, I think if Ribas is looking to get her wrestling going, she can definitely do that. Try and take the fight to the ground and get into a dominant position. Or if it's flipped and Jandiroba wants to get the fight to the ground, I think Ribas has good enough takedown defense to look to keep the fight standing, where I think she's got the advantage. And then I do feel that Ribas is good enough on the ground to the point where if Jandiroba is able to get a takedown on Ribas, she will be able to work her way back up, possibly even get like a sweep or something. There is a scenario where Jandiroba, she's just maybe the more physical fighter, much stronger in there, is able to take Ribas down and just lay on top of her for extended periods, but I just don't really see that happening. So I guess what it kind of really boils down to, and what I believe is going to happen, is I think the grappling is more or less going to neutralize itself. I think it's going to be pretty even there, so I got to go with the fighter that's the superior striker in this matchup, and that's going to be Ribas. So I'm going to pick Ribas to win here, and at minus 140, I do feel like there's still a bit of value on her. I don't think that Jandiroba is going to be able to knock Ribas out. I don't think her hands are quick enough. She'd have to catch her with just a massive overhand or something. And, she kind of telegraphs those quite a bit. And, I don't think she's going to submit Ribas either. So I think the only way that Jandiroba is really winning this is to just grind out a decision, just lay on top of Ribas for 10 minutes or something. But I think Ribas has got good enough defensive grappling to not be put in those situations. So give me Ribas, and give me Ribas by decision. Moving along, we have Volkan Oezdemir versus Magomed Ankalaev, and Ankalaev's the minus 340 favorite. Comeback on Oezdemir is plus 265. And man, this is a fantastic fight. I'm actually really excited for this matchup. The fight that I'm actually looking forward to the most outside of the Jan Sandhagen fight. It's a matchup between two top 10 light heavyweights. You don't see too many of these too often. They're both fantastic strikers. Both guys, top of the division. So a lot of title implications, I suppose, but also, this is going to really shape the landscape of the light heavyweight division. And let's start with Ankalaev first. So, the guy is a super hype prospect. Definitely looks like he's got the goods to back it up. Hasn't shown too many holes in his game. He's got good technical striking. He's got good power. He's got good accuracy. And, he's got a very well-rounded game as well. Because in addition to the striking that he's got, and he's a very proficient striker, he's also got a solid grappling game he can go to. If the fight's ever slipping out of his hand, it is something that he can go to look to just win some minutes there. So yeah, the guy's got a lot to like about him. I think he's a pretty well-rounded package here. A lot of people are saying he's the future light heavyweight champ, which, I'm not sure if I'm 100% on board with that just yet, but on the other hand, I don't know if I have a great argument against it. I do feel he's got a lot of potential. I did say that, it doesn't look like he has too many weaknesses, but, if I had to nitpick anything, I'd say that maybe on the feet he is a little low volume. It's not even that bad, but it's, I guess, generally a little low volume compared to some of the other strikers in the division. And then I guess he doesn't really have a signature win, right? So, He's been in the UFC. He's, I think, accumulated, 5 or 6 wins there so far. 2 of them against the same guy, but I'd say that he hasn't really had a real signature win on his record. Krylov, I think, is probably the best fighter that he's beaten, but that was actually, I think, a pretty close fight, and Ankalaev didn't look like the big favorite we had expected him to be, or that he usually comes in as. So I guess all I'm trying to say is, despite Ankalaev usually coming in as a pretty juiced favorite, I feel like once you start getting into the higher ranks into the division, he's gonna face tougher opposition, and he's gonna start looking less and less like that huge favorite that we're kind of pegging him to be. But I guess this is just a real roundabout way of me saying I don't think he should be this big of a favorite against Oezdemir. But before I get too far into that, I do have to talk about Oezdemir a little bit. So, with Oezdemir, I think he's a really good striker, actually. I think definitely one of the better strikers in the division. And, coming into the UFC, I had higher hopes for Oezdemir. He started out pretty hot, but after the Manua knockout, he hasn't gotten an easy matchup since. Like, he's been matched up with DC. So, yeah, definitely one of the greatest ever. Anthony Smith, a legit vet at the time. Dominic Reyes, future title contender. And, top 5 guy at the moment. Latifi, which, not exactly a killer in there, but, the guy has been around, does have a solid skill set. And he did win that fight, so, good on him. Rakic, and then Jerry. So, this whole time, Oezdemir has just been facing some of the best guys in the division. Whereas Ankalaev, he's fought some decent guys in there, but, if you look at the guys that Oezdemir's been up against, it's completely just a level above anyone that Ankalaev's beaten so far. And in addition to that, Oezdemir has actually been pretty competitive in those fights. That first round with DC, very competitive. He was beating Anthony Smith up until like that 3rd round, and then Smith pulls a submission out of his ass, doing Smith things. And then Dominic Reyes, very close fight there, split decision. And Latifi, he pretty much dominates. Rakic, another very close fight, split decision. People are going to say he maybe should have lost that fight, but people are going to say that he probably should have won the Reyes fight as well. But the point being, he fought Rakic and Reyes, 2 high-level light heavyweights, very competitively. And then the Prochazka fight, he was actually doing quite a bit of damage on the Prochazka that first round, was more or less landing at will on him before Prochazka catches Jerry in that second. No, before Jerry catches Oezdemir in that second round. So I think that Oezdemir is a legit striker, man. He's got good power, he's got good accuracy, he's got good timing in there. So I feel that Oezdemir is actually a little more proven in the UFC, despite having more losses. But then you look at the fighters that Ankalaev's beaten, Marcin Prachnio, one of the chiniest guys on the roster. Klitzen Abreu, I don't even know if he's with the promotion anymore. Dalcha Lungimbula, pretty low-level guy. Most recently, I think, lost to Marc-Andre Barriou, pretty low level. And then Ion Kutulaba twice, once it was a really weird finish, and then the second time they ran it back, Ankalaev was able to beat him, knock him out, which, that was a good win there. But, Kutulaba, I think, is a fringe, top 15 guy. And then most recently, Ankalaev did beat Krylov, who is a top 10 guy. But, we saw just how close that fight was. We saw that Ankalaev's not really levels above these guys, right? I think Ankalaev is definitely, top 10, top 5 material for sure. So for that reason, I just don't see how he can be a minus 300 something favorite when he's probably on par with some of these guys, and it's going to be a pretty close fight. So, despite saying all that, I am going to side with Ankalaev here. I do think he should be the favorite. I think that, striking is a little more technical in there, and I do think he's the more well-rounded fighter. But, as far as where they stand in the division, I think these guys are pretty close. I don't see there being a massive skill gap between these guys. So while I do feel that Ankalaev should be the favorite here, while I will pick him to win, I just don't think he should be this big of a favorite. You could say that the value is with Oezdemir, but I think that if this fight does go to decision and it is pretty close, I do think that Ankalaev wins most of the time. I think the grappling might be what really takes it for him, but, I also feel that, this being in Abu Dhabi, if it is close, he might just get the favorable nod here. So give me Ankalaev, and I'll take him to win via decision. And in the next fight, we have Li Jingliang versus Khamzat Chimaev. And Chimaev's the minus 460 favorite. Comeback on Li is plus 360. And man, what a fight we have here. We're getting the return of Chimaev after about a year off. The guy was riding such a massive hype train. Unfortunate that it kind of got derailed by COVID, but, he is making his return here. Really interested to see how he's going to perform. But, taking a look at this matchup, I will start with his opponent first, Li Jingliang. So the guy is primarily a striker. He's got pretty herky-jerky movement in there. He's got good counterpunching. He's quick. He's accurate, and he does a pretty good job of feinting as well. And, Li, he's actually, pretty good at making opponents kind of freeze up with all the movement that he throws in there. And I do feel Li's got pretty sneaky power. He's not, a thunderous puncher or anything, but, he does have good accuracy in there, and he's got good timing. So if he's able to catch you clean on the chin, he can put you out. And, Li does have a number of knockouts, a number of finishes on his record. So I do feel that Li is potentially pretty dangerous on the feet. But, the issue with him, though, is he's got pretty poor defensive grappling. His takedown defense isn't great, and his ground game is pretty subpar. He can be held up against the cage, and he can be held down. And when he does try to work his way back up, he will give his back, which is a little concerning here. Chimaev's a really good grappler. And then the thing with Li is I just don't think he's got really good grappling cardio either. He is someone who will slow down pretty significantly if you start to put a bit of a grappling pace on him. And that's definitely going to be key here. I think that as you start to grapple him a bit more, he's going to be a little more tired. He's going to be a little less dangerous. So, that's definitely a big concern here coming into this fight because Khamzat, he's an absolute beast on the ground. He's got good wrestling, and then once he's on top, he's very heavy there. He's got some vicious ground and pound. He's got a solid submission game as well. And, he's just running through these guys on the regional scene. He was running through the lower-level guys in the UFC, so the guy's an absolute beast there. And on top of that, he's got pretty good striking as well. And I'm not just saying that because of the Meerschaert knockout. Obviously, it is a good sign. And, seeing how Muradov wasn't able to knock out Meerschaert, but Khamzat was, definitely a good sign. But even on the regional scene, Khamzat showed some pretty good hands. And, he is training with Gustafsson, who also does have a lot of good things to say about Khamzat as well. So all around, Khamzat looking really good here. Very hype prospect. And rightfully so. The guy is just very well-rounded and has been just running through opponents. However, there are a few red flags here coming into this matchup. One, obviously, the guy got a pretty severe case of COVID, took him out for nearly a year. He's talking about coughing up blood and stuff, and, just had some very cryptic, tweets and Instagram posts and stuff about it. And, he'll have taken a year off since then, so I suspect he's fully recovered, but, you just don't know what kind of effect it's going to have on him and, how it's going to potentially affect his cardio. I don't want to put too much stock in it because we see some guys like Volkanovski, he's suffered a bit from COVID, but, came in there and just put an absolute pace on Ortega. But, that is something that I feel should be addressed here. And secondly, this was a concern that I had with Chimaev, even after his meteoric rise. It's really the fact that he's running through his opponents, right? He hasn't really had any opposition. He's been getting his opponents out of there within that first round and a half. And so I guess this kind of ties in with the cardio, but it's, what he's going to do if he isn't able to get his opponents out of there. We haven't really seen Khamzat get extended. So, is he someone who will tire a bit after that first round and a half? If he starts laying just that ground and pound and isn't able to finish his opponents, some question marks there, but, from what I've seen so far, the guy just looks really legit. And, the strength of Khamzat kind of plays into the weakness of Li here. Khamzat, really strong grappler. Li, very weak defensive grappler. So I feel that if Khamzat is able to get his hands on Li, he could probably just control him there at least, possibly, do a bit of damage, maybe get the submission. But, I can see that if Khamzat is able to get the takedowns, he might be able to just get a ton of control time at the minimum. So yeah, I do have to favor Gamzat here quite a bit. The price tag though, minus 460, definitely feels about right. I don't think there's like tremendous value because I do think that, there still are a lot of question marks around Chimaev. So I don't know if I really want to lay the minus 460 on him, even though stylistically this is, I feel, a pretty good matchup for him. That aside, though, I do feel Lee is kind of dangerous on the feet as well. Chimaev is going to have to close the distance on him. And Lee is no scrub on the feet. I don't think this will be as easy for Gamzat as it was when he was fighting, Phillips and Rhys McKee. But yeah, I am still going to side with Gamzat here. I think he gets it done with the grappling. But I'm happy to just sit back and just watch this fight, see how he looks coming back from such a long layoff, and if he's really lost a step. I'm more than happy to just pass on this fight and, maybe get back on the hype train if he wins dominantly. And moving along, we have a heavyweight matchup between Alexander Volkov and Marcin Tybura. And Volkov's the minus 300 favorite. Comeback on Tybura is plus 250. Starting with Tybura here first. So, this guy's a grinder in there. He's a jack of all trades sort of fighter. His stand-up is serviceable, but I do have to say his chin, I think, is a little suspect. He's been knocked out a few times, but that doesn't stop him from shying away from a striking exchange. So even though he's been knocked out a few times, he's still very confident in his striking. He's not going to telegraph his shots. He's not going to make it apparent that, he's going to go to the grappling, even though I do feel his grappling is probably where he's stronger in. I feel like he does his best work when he's able to put his weight on his opponents, lay on top of him, lay a bit of ground and pound, but generally the guy is just looking to control his opponents either up against the cage or on the ground. He does generally prioritize control over damage. However, like I said before, he is content to strike on the feet a lot of the time and isn't super reliable to go to the grappling, even though that's where I believe his strength truly lies. And, this is a fight that I feel he'll definitely have to go to the grappling in because, he'll be going up against Volkov, who is a very high-level striker, definitely one of the better strikers in the division. Volkov, he's very tall and rangy in there, even for a heavyweight. And, he's one of these guys who actually uses his length pretty well in there. He's got a great use of kicks. I really like how he utilizes the kicks to, keep these heavyweights at bay. He mixes it up pretty well there. We'll go to the legs, stifle the movement of opponents a bit, and then does like the kick to the body as well. And I really like that, especially since some of these other heavyweights are kind of plotty in there. And, they got big old bellies for him to kick and really work on. So I really like how damaging some of his kicks are, honestly. Volkov does have some hands as well, but I do feel like his offense is kind of centered and anchored by those kicks that he throws. And Volkov has also been putting on a bit of weight recently, and not just like fat or anything. The guy's been, I think, doing it the right way. I think it really helps with some of his power. He's a little bit slower, I think, because of it, but I do think that it definitely adds an extra bit to some of his shots. And then, of course, it's going to be a little harder to take him down, a little harder to hold him down with that little extra weight that he's got on him now. But taking a look at this matchup, I do feel it is pretty straightforward. I don't think there's too many crazy variables here. I think that on the feet, Volkov's got a pretty significant advantage. And for Tybura, he can definitely hang on the feet for a little bit, but I do expect Tybura to really look to get the wrestling, the grappling going to really have a chance in this fight. I think that if it's 100% standing, I think Volkov destroys Tybura here. I don't know if he knocks him out, but I do see Volkov doing quite a bit of damage. Volkov's going to be the much better striker, obviously, and then he's also going to be the much bigger, longer, and taller guy in there. However, historically, the one thing that Volkov has really struggled against is the wrestling. Granted, in the UFC, he's fought really high-level grapplers. I think the only wrestler he's really fought in the UFC is Blades, and Blades is probably the best wrestler in the division, but even in Bellator and I think on the regional scene, he's struggled a little bit with the wrestling. However, I do feel that it is something that Volkov has worked on, even though Blades was able to take him down, like 15 times. He did stay pretty defensive there, did work his way up a number of times in that fight as well. So I do like how the defensive grappling of Volkov is coming along, but, it definitely is a concern in this fight, especially since Tybura is, he's got that wrestling in his back pocket. However, I do still have to side with Volkov here. He's going to be the much bigger guy in there. It's going to be hard for Tybura to take him down and hold him down. I mean, someone like Blades, super high wrestler, had a really tough time holding Volkov down as well. So I don't see Tybura, who is a little bit older, not as skilled in the wrestling, being able to hold Volkov down or have as much success as Blades did. So obviously the pick for me here is going to be Volkov. I think he should be able to keep it standing long enough to either win on the cards or maybe even put Tybura out. Volkov, he has been getting some knockouts recently. He has been sitting down a bit more on his punches, so that is something that could materialize, but I'm still not completely sold on Volkov being just a knockout artist now. But, taking a look at the betting lines, though, minus 300, not a big fan of the price tag. I do think Volkov wins. I do think he wins at a pretty high clip, so I don't think there's a ton of value here, though. So for me, I don't know if I'll definitely won't be playing him straight, but if anything, I might stick him in some parlays. This is a pretty parlay-heavy card, so I might just stick him in a parlay, but I'm going to go with Volkov here. I think he wins via decision, and this fight might actually play out a little closer than the line would indicate, but I do feel that he should win a majority of the time, even if the fights do play out a little close. I think Tybura might have a little success with the grappling, but overall, I do think that the striking difference is going to be enough to carry Volkov to a victory here. So give me Volkov, and give me Volkov by decision. Moving along, we have Islam Makhachev versus Dan Hooker, and Makhachev's the minus 700 favorite. Comeback on Hooker is plus 500, and we'll start with Makhachev first. So I'll keep this pretty short. We more or less know the deal with Makhachev. The guy is a legit wrestler, arguably the best wrestler or MMA wrestler in the division. I know some people might argue it's Gillespie or even Chandler, but I'm not here to debate that. I'm just trying to say that Makhachev, one of the best wrestlers in the division. His stand-up, not the prettiest. He is kind of technical, does stay defensive there. But, he's not going to be winning any fights on the feet anytime soon. It is serviceable to the point that, he could use it to get in on his opponents and then really get his wrestling going. That's really where he's dominated his matchups, just with the wrestling, the grappling. His control on top is phenomenal. He's got good ground and pound, not super active with the ground and pound, but he is very proficient there. And, he is someone who will prioritize the control a bit over damage. But again, I'm not going to nitpick there. The guy is extremely dominant on the ground. He does have some submissions, but more so the guy is just a super control-oriented grappler. It's pretty hard to look good or even decent against Makhachev because once he takes you down, the round is more or less over. You're not going to be able to get back up, and he's just going to lay on top of you and just control you for the remainder of the round. And him actually getting the finish over Moises in his most recent fight was a pretty good look on his part because Moises, he's a very high-level black belt, and Makhachev was able to just take him down and completely neutralize him there. Like Moises, who I think is one of the better grapplers in the division, did not offer much resistance, wasn't able to do much there. And Makhachev was actually able to finish him there. So I think that's a very good look on Makhachev's part. I think it just shows how elite he is on the ground. So, if you're really going to nitpick anything, it might just be in his striking. But again, I think it is very serviceable there. And he'll be going up against a pretty solid striker in Hooker. Hooker, he's a tall, rangy sort of fighter. He's actually a bit more of a brawler, honestly. The guy's not actually a big knockout guy. He's more of an attritional sort of fighter, but I think Hooker is pretty legit there. He's got really good kicking game. He's got good feints, and he does have a pretty dangerous knee, which Makhachev is going to have to watch out for because Hooker pretty sneaky with those knees up the middle. He does also have a pretty nice low calf kick, which could be problematic for Makhachev. If you start doing a bit of damage to that leg, it could really hinder the takedowns of Makhachev. So, I definitely do have to favor Hooker on the feet. I think he's just a much more varied striker. I think he's just much more experienced there, obviously. So, I do think Hooker does have advantages on the feet. But again, if Makhachev is able to take Hooker down, I think that is likely the round for him. And, with Hooker, Hooker has, historically struggled with grapplers. And I do think the cardio of Hooker is a little questionable. He is a good 3-round fighter, but I don't know if he's a good 3-round fighter when grappling is involved. He's a good 3-round fighter when, it's mainly striking, but if his opponents start to take him down and he's going to have to work his grappling cardio, it's probably not that great. So for that reason, I am obviously going to have to go with Makhachev. I just think this is stylistically a very good matchup for him. Like I said before, Hooker's really struggled with grapplers before. He struggles when people take him down. And, Hooker, he is going to be coming in relatively short notice for this fight. He is coming off that win over Haqparast about like a month ago and has not gone back to New Zealand. So, from what I've seen, he's still training in the States a bit for this. But, he's not really getting a full camp for Makhachev, which is, definitely not good, especially, for someone the caliber of Makhachev. I do feel you should have a bit more of an extended training camp. He's going to be in decent shape at least, but, he probably won't be drilling all the things he wants to drill for this fight. So, yeah, I just feel this is a super tough matchup for Hooker. I just don't know how he's going to win this fight because, I'd like to say that he's going to have to catch Makhachev with something, but again, Hooker's not really a knockout guy. He's more of just attritional damage. And I just don't know if he's going to have too much time to really get his striking going to the point where he's going to either win minutes or even, knock Makhachev out in there. I think if things start getting a little wild, Makhachev is going to be able to just clinch up with him, get his hands on him, and then just peel him to the ground and really do what Makhachev does best there. I guess Hooker's best chance of winning might just be to land a crazy knee or something and potentially knock him out. But I don't really see it. I think Makhachev should take this fight. I just don't see too many paths to victory for Hooker. So I'm going to go with Makhachev. I do have him winning by either round 3 submission or just a very dominant decision. And in the co-main event, we have Petr Yan versus Corey Sandhagen for the interim bantamweight championship belt. And this is actually the fight I'm most looking forward to. I think this is going to be a fantastic striking match between two very high-level strikers. And when the line had initially opened up, I had just taken a 1-unit shot on Sandhagen. And, I think I'm regretting it a little bit because, I'm looked into the tape a little more, and I do feel it is going to be a pretty competitive fight. But I do think that Yan will likely edge out these decisions a majority of the time. But let's take a look at both of these fighters first. So both guys, I think, very skilled on the feet. Let's take a look at Sandhagen first. He's got fantastic footwork in there. He's got good feints, good movement. He's a tall, rangy fighter. He mixes it up very well. He's very good at setting up his strikes. Just all around, I think one of the best strikers in the division. 2 of the best strikers in the division actually going at it. So this will be a really fun fight. But yeah, man, I really like the volume that Sandhagen brings to the table. I like the variety of punches he likes to throw. And just overall, I think Sandhagen's a very legit striker. His defensive grappling, I think, has been an issue for him. His takedown defense isn't particularly great. He does give up his back a lot, and he does look to initiate scrambles a lot of the time. Sometimes it works, but sometimes he'll just end up giving up a good position. And I don't know if this will be too big of a factor here. Yan obviously has got some takedowns, some trips, but historically he just has not been someone who will just sit in someone's guard and throw ground and pound and stuff. But that definitely is a hole that I think could possibly be exploited, but I do feel this will probably play out on the feet. And, taking a look at Yan, I think he brings a completely different skill set to the table, in terms of striking, as opposed to Sandhagen, whereas, Sandhagen is a bit more volume-based. Yan is a lot more power-based. He's not going to throw as much, but, when he does throw, he throws with much more vicious intent, and I do think that Yan has got a bit more stopping power. So, yeah, I do feel that Yan, in general, is going to be landing the harder shots. I do think that Yan has got more finishing upside as well. He also does stay pretty defensively sound in there, but if I had to really nitpick anything, it is that Yan does start pretty slow, and he is somewhat low volume, so he can be a bit reliant on the knockdowns to win fights. I think most notably his fight against I believe it was Jimmy Rivera, where I think he was losing a lot of those rounds up until like the knockdowns at the end of the round. So this could be a fight where if he doesn't get these knockdowns at the end of the round, he could potentially lose these rounds just based off of like the volume. And even if you look at his fight against Aldo, who the first 2 or 3 rounds was actually pretty competitive. Granted, Aldo is still very high level, but we do see that Jan isn't like completely outclassing these guys, on a consistent basis. He does do really well in there, but he's not out here just blowing these high level guys out of the water. Obviously those latter rounds when Aldo started to slow down, it turned into an absolute just mauling in there. But I do think that Jan is a really solid striker. He's very good, but I just don't think that he's like minus like 250, minus 300 good against some of these guys. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's going to be pretty close, pretty competitive. I do favor the volume of Sandhagen. But again, Jan always has that power, and he does have the potential to either end the fight or, really shift rounds with a knockdown. So, Jan definitely has that going on his end. But if he isn't able to land those power shots, I could definitely see Sandhagen start to run away with it a bit with the volume. So yeah, this is actually, I think, a pretty tough fight to call. It really just comes down to what the judges are going to favor more. Are they going to favor the volume and the output of Sandhagen? Sandhagen probably going to be landing a bit more, or are they going to favor some of the power that's coming from Jan? I personally can't tell you for certain, but I do feel this fight goes to a decision. Both guys are pretty durable in there. Jan, obviously, I think if anyone's getting the knockout, it's going to be Jan. But, Sandhagen has shown phenomenal durability in there. So I think more often than not, this does go to a decision. And if it does go to a decision, it really just comes down to what the judges favor. I really don't think any guy is going to get outclassed here. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. But the reason I had placed a bet on Sandhagen initially was because I felt that in a fight that was more or less 50-50, you definitely want to be holding the ticket on the guy that's like plus 200 or so. But, the fact that this fight is taking place in Abu Dhabi, I do feel there might be some favoritism here. I think if it goes to a decision and it is close, then I do feel Jan wins this. So as far as a pick goes, I'm just going to go with Jan here. I do think the power is going to wow the judges a little more. And then, of course, him being Russian, I think is going to be definitely a positive here. Because when I first locked in the bet, I completely forgot about the venue here. But look, I 100% feel Sandhagen is the value side. I believe it is going to be close and competitive. But ultimately, I do think that should it go to a decision and it is competitive, I am going to go with Jan here. And then, of course, outside of the striking, he could potentially hit a takedown as well. So I do think that's going to factor into it a little bit here. I'll take Jan to win via decision. However, I do think it'll be pretty competitive. And in the main event, we have Glover Teixeira versus Jan Błachowicz. And Błachowicz is the minus 285 favorite. Comeback on Teixeira is plus 245. And what a matchup this is. We have two guys who have paid their dues in the UFC going at it. And let's take a look at the challenger first, the slightly older vet in Teixeira. So Teixeira, he's on a pretty nice, respectable streak right now. Has had a very nice UFC run in general, honestly. The guy's extremely well-rounded. His striking is, I think, pretty good. It's not pretty, but it's definitely serviceable. It's a little slow at this point, but, it does look like he's still got some power. And then, of course, the guy is a fantastic grappler. He's very heavy on top. He transitions well. He does a good job of mixing in the ground and pound and the submissions. And, at 41, I do still feel the cardio is decent. And, the guy obviously has a tremendous heart. And, of course, we were able to see that in his most recent fights. The guy just does not have any quit in him. Just an absolute legend of the sport, honestly. But, of course, we do have to be concerned with the age. He is 41. He's a little slow. The athleticism, not quite there anymore. But, again, the guy's got the heart of a champion. And, he'll be going up against Jan Błachowicz, who is another veteran of the sport. Another very well-rounded fighter. Glover is 41, but at 37, Jan is no spring chicken either. And, Jan, I do believe is the better striker in this matchup. I do say well-rounded, but I do feel Glover slightly better grappling, and then Jan a little better in the striking department. So both guys, are good in both aspects, but, one does excel in one department a little over the other. That said, though, Jan, he's got good striking. He's got good counter striking, a very good use of the body work. And, of course, the guy's got that Polish power, right? But I do have to say, prior to that Rockhold fight, Jan's really only had one knockout, and that was over Latifi back in 2014. So, he's had a nice little run of knockouts lately, but I don't think he's like a legit or a top tier knockout artist. That said, though, it is still impressive that he's gotten these knockouts lately, and he has shown that you cannot underestimate him. And people have definitely been underestimating Jan, me included. And I think for only the second or third time ever in the UFC, Jan is going to be the betting favorite. And, I can't say I disagree with this. I think people are finally giving Jan a bit of respect, but also I think it also might be a little bit of a fade on Teixeira, the much older guy as well. But, just taking a look at Teixeira's little run, which, I think it's impressive and all, but, we do have to kind of dig into it a little bit deeper. And I don't want to call it a fluke by any means, because him showing this much grit and heart, I do feel, he definitely does deserve the respect for being able to pull off those wins. You obviously have to be skilled to a certain level to be able to get wins against these guys. But let's take a look at some of his wins, post that Corey Anderson lost. So he gets matched up with Carl Roberson, and Roberson actually hurts Teixeira early, but Teixeira is able to get the fight to the ground and pull off that arm triangle choke. And so this kind of sets the tone for the remainder of his run, right? Because in his next fight, he gets matched up against Kudalaba, takes a ton of damage early in the fight, and then, of course, Kudalaba gasses hard in that second round. And that finishing sequence is actually kind of weird, because Teixeira is actually able to just push Kudalaba over into the ground and basically just get into mount from there and then find the sub. So, I think Kudalaba basically just gassed out. It wasn't even a takedown. The guy just fell over literally. And, Teixeira was able to capitalize, find the submission. And then in his next fight, Teixeira gets matched up against Krylov, which, he wins a split decision. Not going to hate on this win too much. It was a really good win. And this was the only win, I believe, that was against a fighter that didn't completely gas after the first round. So a solid win. And, Krylov, a top 10 guy. So a good win on Teixeira's part there. But then against Smith and Santos, both of these fighters started early. I was piecing up Teixeira, even had Teixeira hurt at a certain point. But, eventually Teixeira was able to get his grappling going and then eventually find the finish, a very late finish on Smith's part, and then was, I believe, able to get Santos out of there, via submission. And, all of these fights kind of have something in common, and it's that Teixeira is able to weather the early storm, wait for his opponents to gas out, and then capitalize. And again, I'm not trying to discredit what Teixeira's done or disrespect him whatsoever, because, again, to have that much heart to come back in all of those fights and then, have it in him to take his opponents down, find the submission, or just work the ground and pound, I think is extremely admirable. But I just don't think that this is something he could pull off in this fight. For one, I just don't think that Jan is that sort of fighter that will overcommit in those early rounds. Jan's not someone that's going to blow his cardio or blow his gas tank in those early rounds and then get finished. I think that Jan is a much more technical striker. He's much more of a tactician in there. And in this stage in both of their careers, I do feel that Jan's got a pretty sizable advantage on the feet. So I do feel that should this fight take place at distance, I am going to favor Jan. I think Jan is honestly going to be able to just pick Teixeira apart in there. I don't know if Teixeira is going to be able to really get his grappling going, because in his most recent fights for Teixeira, he's been able to capitalize on his opponents, really overextending. He's able to get a takedown on them, when they're off balance, when they're a little gassed. And so that's how he's kind of been able to get his takedowns. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to do the same thing against Jan. I don't think that Teixeira's got phenomenal wrestling or anything. And, I think that Jan's takedown defense is solid. So I just don't see too many opportunities for Teixeira to get this fight to the ground. So I am going to have to side with Błachowicz here. I just think that Błachowicz really just works Teixeira at distance. This might actually be a pretty low-paced fight. I think it might kind of play out similar to the Błachowicz-Souza fight. Pretty low output. Neither guy really doing too much on the feet. And then Jan just winning a pretty close, competitive striking battle. I don't think that Błachowicz will look like a minus 300 favorite, when the decision rolls around, but I do feel that Błachowicz should win these decisions the majority of the time. Ultimately, I just think that Teixeira should just be able to outpoint, or Błachowicz should just be able to outpoint Teixeira for 5 rounds and probably win like a 49-46 decision. So I'll go with Błachowicz here, and I'll have Błachowicz winning via decision.